Melinda Mack, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, so New York City had an unemployment rate of up to 20% last month in last month's numbers. Even in Ithaca, unemployment was 9%, which is still very high, even for anywhere around the state. You're part of a group that says that the state could be doing more right now to ensure a stronger workforce recovery as the economy starts to recover. Tell me about your plan and what you'd like to see happen.
Sure. Well, I'm so glad to be here to talk about this because I think as we've come across the pandemic, we're now at a point where we're realizing we've got millions of people out of work across our state, and they're going to need to return to work at some point. We have to have a plan in place to do that effectively. As you described, the pandemic has caused massive unemployment across New York. I was just looking at the numbers before I came in. We're close to over 5 million people who are on some form of assistance, really. That's around crazy. Unemployment assistance. And when you think about that, in the last economic downturn, we peaked at around 850,000 people, right? So this is unprecedented by many, many standards. That being said, we shouldn't be sitting back and waiting for the economy to recover to get people back into employment. And I think one of the things that we've been looking at is who's been laid off and what types of sectors and industries are being impacted. But more importantly, what's the trajectory for the recovery, right? So when we look at the data, what we know is sectors like hospitality, tourism, retail are likely going to have high impacts. It's also going to impact primarily people of color and people who are low wage. But ultimately, those are also going to take a while to recover. And so what we're saying right now is the time to actually retrain individuals, people who want to go to the next level in their career, so that when we recover, we actually recover back better by having folks in better employment and better family-sustaining jobs.
So providing this workforce development and this skills training is obviously going to cost money.
Of course,
I'm assuming an investment from the state or the federal government. How do we pay for that when the state is facing a $14 billion budget deficit? I feel like every idea right now that says it's got a price tag is going to be, frowned upon.
Well, I was just on a call with the Division of Budget yesterday, and they very clearly said we've got no cash in the coffers to spend on this, right?
Yeah.
That being said, workforce development is an important investment, just like economic development. Traditionally, what happens is in an economic downturn, the federal government comes in with a stimulus package that funds workforce at billions and billions of dollars. And so in the last economic recovery, it was around $5 billion that came out through the American Recovery Reinvestment Act. We're asking for $15.6 billion to come out from the federal government to actually respond to the crisis of this magnitude. We had high hopes that the federal government would fund it through the last stimulus before folks went away in August. We're hoping now it happens before the election, but ultimately the funding typically comes from the federal government. That being said, there are things we can do that don't cost money. And I think from our perspective, it really is around thinking about the policy shifts that allow for flexibility with the dollars that we have. And so we were talking before we came on air, right? The fact that folks are unable to access internet and access computers at the scale that are necessary. How do we loosen up the resources that we have to make sure that those are investments that are eligible for funding that we already have at our fingertips? So those are the kinds of policy changes we're looking for.
This is such a complicated issue because even if we have the access to skills training and access to these jobs and loosening of regulations, there are still some factors that are out of the control of people that are seeking these jobs and seeking these skills, like childcare. What are you going to do with your kids if you get a job? Or housing. What if you're a homeless person or living in a shelter? And how do you do that? So have you looked at issues like that in terms of strengthening our workforce while confronting these issues that are going to kind of prevent that growth?
Yeah, and I will tell you, these are issues before the pandemic. They were huge issues before the pandemic. It's one of those unfortunate realities that it took a pandemic to have people pay attention to it. Childcare has always been a significant issue. Housing has always been a significant issue. Transportation, right? These are the pieces, the building blocks that make the workforce system interdisciplinary in nature. So childcare, absolutely. I think one of the things that we've recognized is there's an equity issue around your ability to work remotely. And so right now what we're finding is the complicated factor around the return to school is actually creating a huge challenge in terms of working parents' ability to actually return to work effectively. I think one of the things that we were hearing primarily from legislators sort of in the Southern Tier and other places is that the $600 amount unemployment insurance sort of stipend that was being added onto your UI check was forcing people not to return to work, or they were choosing not to return to work. The evidence doesn't bear that out, that $600 is gone. You're not seeing a flood of people returning to employment. What we're hearing anecdotally on the ground, it's the childcare issue. It's still the concerns around safety, but also because the wages are not there, right? Why would you return to a low-wage job and have to struggle to find childcare, as well as try to figure out what you're going to do for transportation, especially if your bus line isn't running anymore? So I think, again, part of the challenge here is you have to look holistically at the people you're trying to get back to work, understand the barriers that they're facing, and make the investments appropriately, because that's how you actually get people to stick in the labor market.
It is a hugely complicated issue, and it's something that we have to keep our eye on, especially as we're coming out of this economic loss. It's just something that we can't ignore, strengthen our workforce. So Melinda Mack from the New York Association of Training and Employment Professionals, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.